So learning outcome 4, you need to be able to create certain media documents and also to be able to evaluate them, say what's good or bad and how they might add to a production of a product. A proposal document, which is sometimes by the exam board called a high concept document. So just watch out for that on the exam paper. If it says high concept, it's talking about a proposal document. Basically, these are completed after you've carried out your research. So once you've looked at all your research into the media product, you need to create a proposal. So the document is used to actually communicate your ideas that you have to the client so that they can review it and see whether they agree with what you're suggesting. The document can take different formats, so it could be in the form of a word processed document, or you could do it in a proper presentation where you have a PowerPoint and you go in and you present it to the client. The whole purpose of this is to try and sell your idea to them. So it is used as part of a pitch. The language in them is usually non-technical because they won't necessarily be aware of particular keywords that you're using. One thing that you can say is that it needs to be really clear and detailed about exactly what you're going to do. And you could include headings such as like a description of what you're doing, who the audience is, what resources you're going to need or use, any potential costs and the timescales that you need to follow. So a project outline document is something that you give to the staff. So something that you would give out to people that are working with you on a particular project so that they've got a basic outline of what's actually going on for the project. It allows the team to produce their own documentation. So for example, somebody who's working on cinematography could start to draw up a shot list by using the project outline. The details that are included on this are things like the narrative, any resources that are required, the budget and the timeline. A treatment document is something that's a bit more detailed and more in depth than the outline document. These can vary depending on what type of product that you're making. So obviously for a movie, it's going to look a lot different than a magazine. These documents are usually used for two different people. So it could either be your clients and your investors to try and get them to put money into your project, or it could be the actual production team themselves. So it could be given out to staff so that they can see a little bit more clearly about what they have to create. They're basically used as a starting point for all of the other documents to be created. So by using this treatment document, you should be able to draw up a storyboard, you should be able to write a script, and so on. Now there's a little bit more detail for production schedule in Learning Outcome 3, but basically every media production, particularly the larger ones, definitely will be following a production schedule. It's pretty much a planning document which shows the key dates and milestones. So you've got to think, when are we actually starting this project? When does it need to be done by? When does this scene need to be done? When do we need to do this particular stage, and so on? It's something that you can include as links to the different call sheets. So once the production schedule is all completed, each day will have its own separate call sheet. You won't really be able to make any call sheets without having a production schedule. It's very, very useful to actually plan a project when you've got something like this, and you often use software that's particularly made just for this, or for the smaller products you might just do a Gantt chart in a spreadsheet software. Things that it might include are details of the initial proposal. Key dates are the most important bit, which are sometimes called milestones. You have the location details, so the location of where everything's going to be taking place. You need a list of all the resources, any personnel that are involved, and so on. Now the best thing about a production schedule is it helps the production go to plan. It also helps you to make sure that deadlines can be met. And it's so that all personnel, all the staff that are working on the product will actually know what's happening. One of the most important things is that you stick to budget. If you go over budget, then your product is not going to be as successful, or you might not actually be able to create it. Disadvantage of a production schedule is that it requires a lot of work to put together. You need to have a lot of regular meetings with the staff to make sure things are going to plan. Logistics, such as all the personnel, the locations, the props, the set design, everything that needs to actually get done, are very work intensive, and sometimes they're difficult to plan according to timescales. And also contingencies are not always possible, they're not always viable, or very difficult to plan for. A call sheet links to the overall production schedule, and when it comes down to actually filming, you're going to have to really put a lot of thought into what's going to happen on each day. For example, if you're going to film a lot of scenes in the same location, then you need the call sheets to say what's happening. That doesn't mean that the scenes are all going to be in the exact order that they're supposed to be in, but it will make a lot more logistical sense to film them in the same location while you're already there. It would also make sense to film a lot of night scenes all at the same time while it's nighttime, rather than trying to do everything in chronological order. The call sheet is basically a filmmaking term for what's happening on each day. It's given out to all of the cast and crew so that everybody knows where they're supposed to be at a given time. The things that it includes are basically the location of the filming, where it's going to take place, details of which cast are involved, any equipment that's needed, and all like the times, like when does this scene start, when does it finish, when does this actor need to be here, and so on. So obviously these are really useful for cast and crew, so they know where they need to be and when. It also helps with busy schedules, so that some actors could be working on 2 films at the same time and they just need to be in the right place at the right time. The disadvantage of call sheets is they take a long time to prepare, and you'd have to do them all again if anything changes or doesn't go according to plan. The SWOT analysis is something that you can carry out at pretty much any stage of the production. Now, what you're basically looking to do is go through all of the strengths, so what you think it is that's good about your idea, any weaknesses, so anything that you think you could improve on or something that you think is not the best, any obstacles that you might face, so anything that could go wrong, and any opportunities, so what you think about what you actually want to achieve and things that you could do to make that happen, or things about this idea that might help you get to what you want to do. So you can carry out a SWOT analysis at all sorts of different stages on different things. One common thing that you might use a SWOT analysis for is a location. You might think, right, where could we film this particular film? Come up with 4 or 5 locations. You do a SWOT analysis for each one. It will obviously show you which one has got more strengths than weaknesses, which one of these ideas has got the most strengths and the least weaknesses, which one has got the least threats, the least health and safety risks, and things like that. So the best thing about SWOT analysis is it helps you to identify good things and to see whether ideas are viable or not. It also helps to highlight other areas where you could be more successful, and obviously look and start thinking about problems, issues that might occur, and how you could come up with a contingency plan. The disadvantage of a SWOT analysis is if you do a SWOT analysis all the way through your production on all these different things like locations and script and casting ideas, set design, and so on, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to analyse all of these different ideas. So that's going to be very time consuming. And also it is quite a difficult thing to do, to try and predict what the threats are going to be. What are the obstacles? You're not always sure what they're going to be before you start. An asset log can take a slight different format depending on the production. For things like websites, for example, your asset log is going to be a list of all of the images and sounds and videos and so on that are going to be included within the website. For something like a movie, this could be a list of different sound effects, music that's going to be used, any sort of still images or advertising pictures that you might need. But it could also include assets such as props that are going to be used within the film. It's basically a list of all the resources used during your production. The main purpose is so that you can check any legal issues that can arise from their use. So, for example, any copyright breaches. If you're going to use something that you don't have permission for, this will highlight that information so you don't breach the legislation. Basically includes the title of all the assets, why you're using it, where it's going to be used, where you got it from, all ownership details, and whether or not you've got permission to use the asset. Best thing about this is you can keep track of all of the assets that you're going to use. Make sure you don't miss things out. Make sure you follow all of the legislation. Make sure that you follow all the regulatory bodies. What I mean by regulatory bodies is, for example, the PRS. They are responsible for tracking which music is used to make sure that artists are given the right money when people use their songs. So if your asset table has a list of music that you're going to put in your film, it'll make sure that those artists are paid and that you don't use their songs without permission. The disadvantage of an asset log, it's very, very time consuming document to create. It can often be very repetitive, putting the same information over and over again, and sometimes can be a very, very big document for large projects. Risk assessment, often referred to as a REC, basically because reconnaissance is taken when you are going to go and see what a location is like. You will go to the location where you're going to film something to see what things are like, but one of the main purposes for that is the risk assessment. So the risk assessment document is basically carried out during the visit of a location, and you're looking to see whether there's any issues with camera angles, lighting, any sort of acoustic problems with the sound, and any major health and safety issues. During the risk assessment, a lot of photos are often taken so that you can actually start planning out where you're going to set up your equipment during the filming process. You can also look at accessibility. How accessible is the location to get to? How much is it going to cost to move all of the cast and crew to this location, and so on. The main purpose and the good thing about it is obviously you're making sure everybody is safe, and it helps you with the whole planning process. You're also following all of legislation that you're going to need to follow to make sure everyone's safe. The disadvantages is obviously you can't always predict what's going to happen. Accidents will always occur, and obviously it's costly for people to travel to different places in the country and look at, or even in the world, and look at the different locations. A storyboard is one of a very, very useful set of tools that you can do when you're planning a production. So if you think that before you even start making any sort of camera footage, start recording anybody actual acting, you need to get a good clear idea of what's going to happen, what order the scene's going to go in, and it's a very good way of allowing you to visualize what your product's going to look like and let other people see that as well. Now it's essentially a graphic way of organizing the whole narrative of your product. It shows the chronological order, so it shows all the scenes in which kind of order they're going to go in, but it also kind of suggests what camera angles and techniques you might use during the production. So the best thing about Storyboard is it helps to all of the personnel working on the production to visualize the product. It helps you to plan, helps you to think which scenes you could film in which order, which films you could put on a call sheet together because they're in the same location, and so on. So that really helps you to create call sheets on the production schedule. It helps with set design because you can see the location, you can see what the actual scene is going to look like, and you can think about how to set up the set. And also it will help people like costumes and prop designers to see what kind of costume or prop to come up with to match what the director's vision is on the storyboards. Disadvantage of storyboards is obviously costly to create at a professional standard. Anybody can draw a storyboard with some stickmen on, but to do on a professional standard, as shown in this example here for Jurassic Park, it's a very, very expensive process. Another disadvantage is you might have to redo the storyboard if anybody makes any changes. Some scenes that you do in a storyboard might not always be possible or viable to do in reality due to budget constrictions or health and safety. A script is something that's used for a TV show or a movie in general. It could be used for some sort of radio advert or an animation when there's text going on. So the idea is that when you have a script, they all follow the common theme. It's so that everybody gets used to it. They know what to expect. They know how to read from them. An actor can learn to read from a script because they use the same common layout. So any actions that are taking place, so if somebody's walking across the screen, for example, or something major is happening in the narrative, that will fill the whole width of the script. All the text is justified, so it's kind of in like box shape. There's no kind of alignment over to the left or the right. Any speech that's used is centered, so it's kind of in a smaller paragraph in the middle of the page, and there's the actor's name or the character's name is in capital letters just above the speech. So you can easily go through a script, find all your character parts, and then highlight those particular bits so you know which lines are yours, and it makes it easier to learn them. Sometimes they'll have a scene heading, which is occasionally called a slug line by the exam board. These state three important pieces of information. So it's whether the scene is interior or exterior, whether it's inside or outside. They indicate the location, so whereabouts is this scene taking place, and they also indicate the time of day that the scene is at. This makes it a lot easier again to do the call sheets. As you're going through, you can kind of match the scenes to the call sheets. You can learn your lines based on what you need to do that day. So the advantage of a script is it obviously helps to pitch a project to the studio and the producers. Sometimes there's hundreds of scripts sat on a table in a production company where somebody's job is literally to read through the scripts and find good ones to try and pitch to people. It helps actors rehearse their roles. It helps the crew to produce call sheets. As I said before, you can see where the location is, the time of day, and so on. And it also helps to plan the whole production. So you could film all of your night scenes at the same time, or film all the scenes in one location at the same time. Disadvantage of a script is it's not always possible to get your ideas across. Sometimes it's difficult to visualize what's going on just from text. And also some people have different interpretations of the script. One person could read the line in a certain way, whereas it might be meant in a different way. A shooting script is essentially a list of all of the camera angles, all of the scenes that you're going to record in a day. So you have a shooting script, you have a list of all of the shots that you need to capture. Usually they'll be categorized in one location so you can do them all together. You'll have a short description of what the shot's going to be, any sort of framing, so what camera angle are you going to use, and details about things like what props are in the scene and any actors. This is generally used by the cameraman and the cinematographer so that they can see how to set things up on each day. The best thing is it helps to plan out the cinematography of scenes so you can kind of put a little bit more thought into how are we going to express what we want to express with the camera angles and so on. Also helps you to plan the production, get your timings right. You can think, right, we need to get all these scenes, all of these shots in this day, otherwise we're in trouble. Disadvantage of a shooting script is not always clear exactly what you want to film. It's also a very onerous task to complete the paperwork. If you do ever change anything, it's going to take a long time to go back and update that paperwork. So concept art is a form of digital art that's used to get your ideas across for a media product. It's difficult sometimes when you're reading a script to kind of visualize what somebody might look like, a character. Often it's used in particular for things that aren't always completely clearly obvious, like what a monster might look like, what an alien could look like, what a big giant scene could look like, because there's a lot going on. So in the two examples that you see here, they are helping to visualize what something might look like in a film that you won't have always seen before. So the advantages with concept art is sometimes it helps to pitch the project. It's also useful to show what your vision is for something so that someone doesn't get the wrong idea. Concepts are not always viable. So a disadvantage of concept art is you might have this fantastic idea, draw it out and everything looks brilliant on a piece of paper, but it might not always be possible to make. It's also very costly to hire the artist to create concept art It's not something you can play around with and keep changing around. A visualization diagram really helps you to picture what your actual final product might look like. So the whole purpose of it is it's kind of like a rough sketch or a drawing to show how something will look when it's finished. Helps you to plan the layout of something. You mainly use a visualization diagram for things that are still images or with very minimal movement, such as a website or a magazine cover. You're essentially doing a rough sketch or a rough layout of what it might look like without actually making the product. Best thing about visualization diagrams is, again, they're really useful to kind of sell this to your clients. For example, if somebody asks me to make a website, I'm not going to go away and make a full website with everything working on it. I would do something maybe in Photoshop or a rough layout of what I actually want it to look like before I start making it. That way the client can see whether they approve or not before you go down the wrong path. So for the exam, you need to make sure that you include things like colour schemes that you're going to use. You don't have to actually colour it in the test, you just have to explain what colours you're going to use and justify why you're using those colours. You need to put some sort of navigation in. If it was for a website, you need to explain what the navigation is and justify which links you're using and why. You have to show any images that you might use. You don't have to draw them out. You just have to explain what they are. What are they a picture of? And just try to label and justify what things are on the actual page. A flat plan, which is sometimes called a wireframe, so I'm not sure which language they'll use in the test, either a flat plan or a wireframe, but it's basically a 2D representation of how everything's going to look on the page. So again, this could be mainly used for a web page or a magazine article. You're basically just doing a really rough layout of how the product is going to look. So you can just draw boxes to show where images are going to be. You can just draw boxes to show where a button might go. You can put things like headline in to show that there might be a big piece of text there. You can put little squares where you want buttons to go. It's a basic way of showing the layout of something for just layout purposes only. You're not supposed to go into too much detail, but you should justify why you've set things out in a particular way and perhaps justify what colour scheme you might use in the exam. So prototype is a little bit of an ambiguous one with this exam. For example, I would have said a prototype is a really rough version of what your final product might look like. But sometimes I would have a prototype that actually works and it can show how the thing's going to work, but not necessarily what your final appearance might look like. But for this exam and in the textbook, it refers to it as having all the functionality, so to show how it works, but not necessarily what it's going to look like. So to be safe, you basically need to follow what the textbook says. So a prototype is the bare bones of a product. It literally shows how everything's going to work. So for a mobile app, for example, it will show all the functionality, how all the buttons work, how it all links together, but not the final appearance of it. So for example, it could all be in black and white, or you might use very simple basic icons without actually putting all of the graphics into the product. So a prototype is essentially used to show how something will work rather than what it's going to look like. A page mock-up is similar to a wireframe, but it contains a little bit more information, such as specific content to be included. So not just image, but like image of what. So for example, on this top left one, you would put in image of model in black and white, crouching down or in the squat position or whatever. For a website, you might put large animated banner which scrolls between image 1, image 2, image 3, whatever the names of the pictures are. This one, a page mock-up, gives a much more visual idea of what the final product is going to look like. You would generally use a page mock-up to get feedback, so you would use it to show what the kind of idea of the layout, color scheme and images that you're going to use, so that you can get feedback before you actually start putting all of the text in and start making it up as a professional document. All of the forms that are required for a production, such as the consent form, a release form and a location form, are basically written official documents that need to be signed and dated by all of the people involved. A consent form is basically for any actors or any personnel under the age of 18 to say that their parents are fine with them being in a particular film or being used as a photograph in a website or whatever. A release form is something that waives the right to approve or disapprove of a finished product. So for example, actors will sign an approval form to say that, I release the final movie to the public and I'm not going to kick off and complain about what's in it or not. And also, you're confirming that you're not breaching any sort of contract by being in your film. A location form is used so that you have the landowner's permission to film in a certain location, so that someone doesn't turn around and say, you didn't have permission to film there, I'm going to sue you for so much money. So set design is used to allow you to create sets for a movie or TV production. It could be in 2D or 3D, but it'll have to match what it will be visualized as during production. Sometimes they're drawn out as models. Sometimes they are just drawn out on a piece of paper. Basically helps to plan where you can place the cameras, where things need to move, any risk assessments, such as if there's a big large chandelier above someone's head, things like that. Set design can be really important because it helps to achieve verisimilitude. It helps to make things more believable. If your sets look realistic, then the film will be more believable. It also, with set design, it allows you to think about how you can actually make things a bit more viable. Such as in class, we watched a clip from Terminator where a car smashes through the front of a police station. Now, you're not going to be able to hire an actual police station and drive a car through the front of it. So that scene was made using an old warehouse, and they basically built a police station set inside the warehouse. Now, the exam board have used different words to describe this one. So sometimes it's been called a site map, sometimes it's called a site structure diagram. Sometimes it would think it was called a site diagram as well. So a site diagram is used to show where each hyperlink will go to inside of a website or a mobile app. You're basically thinking about, how will this product navigate? How can I get from one page to the other? It follows a hierarchical structure. So you start off with home, wherever your first page is, you start at the top. Then underneath, the next kind of layer down is any pages that you can get to from the home page. Then it continues like that. So where can you get to from the about page? Where can you get to from the contact us page? And everything needs to be shown linking together so that whoever makes the actual website knows which links to put in. So on every single exam paper, I think anyway, you've had 2 8-mark questions to do. Now, these are essentially where you've got to actually create something yourself. So for starters, you need to have a really good awareness of what each actual type of document is. So you need to know a definition for each of the different documents. If you know what it is, then you'll be able to create it. I'm just going to give you some tips by using the mark scheme for how to try and get as many marks as you can for each product. So some tips for the 8 markers. The mark scheme basically has marks for content and marks for fitness for purpose. So you need to think about what the actual document is and make sure that you include any content that the brief actually asks for. For example, if it says it wants a website wireframe making, you need to make sure you include anything in that wireframe that the content is asked for. For example, if it says a page for about us, a page for contact us, a page for social media links, you need to put any content into that wireframe. Fitness for purpose means if it's got a particular thing that it needs to achieve, you need to match it up to the brief. So again, if it says it needs to persuade people to buy a product, you need to try and put things in that might persuade them, such as adverts or videos. It needs to be relevant for the audience. So if the audience is for young children, you need to make sure that you put things on that are going to be suitable for those young children. It needs to be used so that anybody else can follow it. So you can't assume anything. You can't put this little plan together and think, oh yeah, they can use that. You've got to assume that anybody that isn't you can look at what you've done and create the website from it, or create the movie from it. So you've got to try and make it as detailed as you possibly can. Another big section, which is where loads of people drop marks, is they don't annotate what they've done. So once you've drawn out your wireframe, once you've created your visualization diagram, once you've written your script, whatever it is that you've done, annotate it around the sides to justify what you've done. So draw arrows to things, annotate why you've done it. This is a color scheme. I have chosen this because blah, 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 blah. Okay? Try to justify it against your audience requirements. Try to justify it against what it says in the brief. So I have done this because the brief says this. If you annotate to clearly demonstrate why you've chosen particular content, I have used this picture because of this, you're going to get marks for it. So the more annotations you do, the more likely you are to pick up marks. It's not about the artwork. You can draw stickmen. You can put boxes in and just say this is an image of this. It's not about your artwork. It's about the detail and about referring back to the brief. What have you done this for and why? So different exams have different final questions. Some of them are 16 marks, some are 18 marks, and there's a couple of 20 mark questions. So they are essentially always about evaluating the type of documents. So what is good about using these pre-production documents? How does it benefit the production? So I'm just going to give you some tips using the mark scheme of how to try and get the top mark band for 16 to 20 mark questions. So for all 16 to 20 mark questions, every single one so far has always been to evaluate the type of pre-production document. So every single one has just been about one type of document. You might find that quite difficult to do 16 to 20 worth of marks on one document. But if you make sure that you cover what the document is, so kind of a description and definition of what the document is, what you actually use it for, some advantages, some disadvantages, and then how can it help the specific product that's mentioned in the brief. Now the mark bands, I'm not covering the low and the bottom one. I'm just going to focus on the top and the middle. So if you go for one of those two mark bands, you're going to pick up most of the marks. So the top mark band that describes it as an excellent evaluation. So you're looking to do kind of like 3 advantages, 3 disadvantages, or 4 advantages, 2 disadvantages, whichever way you want to look at it. Try to make 6 points. You want to try and have a wide range of appropriate uses and elements. So what can you specifically use that type of document for, and link it to the brief. It says use context-based examples to fully justify the points made. So I'll give you an example. A visualization document, a visualization diagram could be used to help the planning of the production of a website. To justify it, you could say it will show all color schemes to be used. It will give the client a full breakdown of your ideas and what you want it to finally look like, which will help sell it to them and allow you to get feedback. So you've got specialist terms will be used correctly and appropriately. You want to try and put keywords in as much as you can. So use keywords like client, use words like feedback, use words like justify, use words like color scheme, use words like layout, and so on. And you want to try your best to make sure you've got as few as possible errors with your punctuation, your grammar, and your spelling. Okay, so the difference between the top and the middle mark bands is basically how many valid points that you make, and that you don't always justify why you might use that particular document. So basically, to get yourself in that top mark band, every point that you make, you need to try and justify it and link it to the brief. That's where people lose marks. They don't mention the actual document in relation to the brief that's been given to you.